everyone, welcome back to Wonderland TCG. My name is Neko Wonderland, and with me today I have Bones,
Hi.
Maddie,
Hi.
and Riley.
Hello.
Today we are going to be bringing you episode 3 of our Ranking of Commanders series, where we go through practically every commander in the CDH format and give our honest thoughts on them and rank them against one another. As always, these thoughts that we give are absolute 100% fact, with no room for bias or interpretation. Any comments to the contrary will be screened by Bones.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I know that I'm right, so I don't know about you guys, but
Exactly. We are nothing but right here, and anything said
Yeah,
to the contrary is slander.
well, Bones is wrong usually.
Bones is the scapegoat of the situation, I guess. But in all honesty, these are just our opinions and our experiences with these decks. If you disagree, we would love to hear your opinions down in the comments. But starting off, just to briefly recap the way we are ranking these commanders, we are viewing them as if this were like a tournament setting, viewing the decks, how they compete against one another, viewing how they look in the current metagame, and also ranking them based on how people view them within the format. A good pilot can make really any of these decks work, and even if we say a deck may be a bit bad or we're not too high on the deck, doesn't mean that it is actually a bad deck. Even the decks down in F tier can win games. With that being said, we are going to jump right in to our first pairing of the evening, Ikra Dargo.
Yeah, so we saved this one for me because I am one of the original Ikra and Dargo pilots. Back during Commander Legends, when that first dropped was when I was first really introducing myself to the CDH community, and I tested and played the hell out of this deck. Ikra and Dargo nowadays has gone through a lot of different iterations, but now it is a powerful Jund turbo option with a bunch of different one-card win cons in Pattern of Rebirth, in Eldritch Evolution into Razaketh, into the various breach lines you can do with Dargo that we've discussed previously. Lots of really cool things. Greater Good is a powerful storm card with Bergi. Dargo does a lot of unique things. Now, you are playing Jund, so you're going fast and you're doing nothing else. Everybody accepts this. And Dargo goes fast. You know, its interaction is limited on the stack. Having green and red really being the only, like, you have Pyroblasts, you have Deflecting Swat, you've got Veil of Summer, you got some weird ones like Xantid Swarm, which is played in a lot of lists. Guttural Response, I think it's called. Yeah, targets a blue instant specifically, so it has very limited ways to protect itself. Deck has a lot of weaknesses in that it generates 0 card advantage in the command zone. Your Commander Ikra does virtually nothing, and you just lose a lot being turbo. But that's the glass cannon aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I actually think this deck is very good, and I think I talked about this a bit last episode, but the advantages that you get and the interesting synergies you get from running Dargo in the command zone are very strong, very powerful. In these colors, you get the ability to, say, Eldritch Evolution, Dargo into Razaketh, or Birthing Pod, and there's a lot of really strong things you can do there. I talked about Greater Good a little bit. I think that card is very good. I think Dargo, especially like in this one, you're going super fast, turbo Dargo, I think has a lot going for it. I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite. This one and Corvold are both the ones that I think when I think Jund.
Dargo's cool, but Corvold does draw cards, which, CDH players have a bias towards cards that say draw cards, because we love cards. We just love drawing those cards. It's probably a better deck, but it has the same weaknesses that Dargo has, I think, outside of the drawing cards thing. And it doesn't have as many one-card win cons as Dargo. But, they're still both pretty fragile. But Corvold does draw cards. Dargo, notably, doesn't draw cards. But yeah, Dargo, Ikra, I love the deck. High C tier. Maybe low B.
I think I agree with high C.
Here's the thing, though. You mentioned it goes fast. It does a lot of really cool things, but as you mentioned, it has low card draw in the command zone. It has some very glaring faults, like very minimal stack interaction, and we've rated other glass cannon decks like Bergie and Anya really low. And so, how does green add to it?
Green obviously does have the more significant stack interaction than just like Rakdos or Mono Red, right? That those Veil of Summers, those Xantid Swarms, the Guttural Response, as well as the nature of a one-card win con deck is you can sometimes eat a counter spell on a win con and just have a second one. So there's a few things that Ikra Dargo does better than those decks. Notably, those one-card win conditions that there are 8 of now in the list, 9 maybe, like an absurd amount. Like if you play all of them, if you include Birthing Pod, Pattern, Eldritch Evolution, Razaketh himself, Underworld Breach, so on and so forth. So it's that high density of win conditions that I think pushes it forward a little bit, right? Is that you can have 2 or 3 win conditions in one hand sometimes. And they all just pivot off of Dargo.
I personally would be comfortable putting Ikra Dargo in between Brea and Elsha.
I agree with Riley that it's pretty good in between Brea and Elsha. I think I rate it higher than Elsha, but I think looking at a deck like Brea, I might view that one slightly better, even though I don't really like Brea.
I agree. This deck is really fun. I think the strategies that Dargo offers, we talked about it a little bit before, but are really cool. It allows for a lot of neat paths, a lot of unique cards. I really like Sacrifice, for example.
Burn Offering is the better of the two.
Burnt Offering, yep. Fire Giant's Fury, I believe it's called. A lot. So, but the deck does have card advantage in its own way. This is, I think, the most definitive Dargo deck because it is just Dargo in Jund colors.
Yes.
Which compare well with his identity. That being said, the deck is based around Dargo. So if you don't have Dargo, the deck really does suffer because you don't have that pivot potential some of the other Dargo options have, like Dargo Thrasios or even Dargo Tymna. You are really all in on the turbo Dargo go fast strategy, which isn't a bad strategy, but it does have its faults. I like the deck though. I've seen it do really cool things. So I think I am also comfortable with that higher seed.
I agree this is the Dargo deck. If I think Dargo, I see Jund color identity on that boy.
Ikra who?
Ikra who?
Jund is also cool. Like Thrasios, it gives you access to the artifacts you want, and also the mana dorks, which Dargo can just nom up all day.
Yeah, that's why green is so. That's the main reason he's so good is because of the dorks. Green really supports those dorks, and Greater Good just behaves like a second Nause sometimes.
Yeah, with the decks we haven't seen right now, I do think it's on the higher end. So, but we can move on to our next commander, another 3-color option. This time, another Planeswalker. We have Estrid, Bant commander whose real claim to fame is her ability to combo with cards like Chain Veil and generate infinite mana.
So yeah, Estrid protects her permanence. Bant's just bad colors, right? Everybody agrees this?
Yes.
Bant is bad colors. You don't win, like she's not even an outlet for her infinite mana.
So I used to play Estrid like quite a bit. There are some really cool things that she can do. She breaks parity on stasis. She breaks parity on the orbs really well. Winter orb, static orb. She can play a lot of stacks effects and get around them.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, she doesn't have any relevant card advantage. She's in Bant, so her win conditions are terrible. And it's a planeswalker. People love attacking planeswalkers. So
They really do. It's cringe.
actually really difficult to protect yourself playing Estrid. And I mentioned this with the Revi, but when you're playing stacks, you need to control the entire game from the beginning of the game. And I don't see Estrid doing that in a tournament setting. I don't see Estrid being able to lock down 3 turbo decks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Revi, and the comparison has a lot of merit, I think. We spoke last time on how the bird can also break parity under itself with those orb effects, and you don't have nearly as good win cons in Estrid as you do with Derevi. You don't have those Emil Gaia Cradle loops.
You don't have those really beautiful lines that like Spellseeker has. Yeah, Estrid just doesn't win the game at all, ever.
Yeah, no, Estrid is a deck you bring to pub stomp on the people playing too much combo. You don't bring it to a CDH table.
No, it's like it's a deck that just doesn't really win. It doesn't do the thing very well. It protects its stacks, but it sits there and it makes people feel bad.
The only way Estrid is going to make a top 16 is if they go
Yeah.
to turns in every single
Yes.
game and draw every single game.
Estrid only wins through concession, realistically, and it doesn't draw cards well. So that's like DF easy.
I would never play this commander outside of casual. And if you're playing it in casual, like you can't even do the stacks things because you're just don't. She's not good enough for CDH. I'm just gonna say that. This to me is an F tier commander. Bant sucks. We hate Bant. By we I mean me. And Estrid provides no real advantage in the command zone. Oh, I can ultimate Estrid, and that's technically part of it. You're not
Shush.
ultimating
Yeah.
Estrid. You're not
No.
ultimating Estrid.
She's dying to
What are
Crom,
you kidding?
actually. So
She's dying to Crom. There are better planeswalkers in this format that die to Crom. Play one of them.
A really nice place for Estrid on this tier list, and I think it would be in between Edric and Brago. Just there's Simic on one half, Azorius on the other, and in the middle it's Bant.
that sounds right. Even though I don't want to think about you guys ranking Edric and F.
As much as I've been ripping on Brago, I actually think Brago's better because at least Brago can win in some ways.
For example, did you guys know that Brago just got a new 1-card win condition?
That doesn't change anything, Bones.
Bottom
So-
of F, right above Atla, is perfectly fine, I think.
Thick.
Yeah.
I agree with
Appropriate.
that.
Let's move on to another 3-color commander. And Bones, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this one. Evelyn.
So first of all, we've talked a little bit about Grixis being pretty good. You have a lot of the best cards in the format. I would argue that those are like the better colors in the format right now. Evelyn is a very fast commander, a little bit glass cannony because you are relying on that World Gorger Dragon win con, but you don't even have to really rely on it because you can just run Nas, you can just run Console, you can do whatever the hell you want, but you also are running probably the best World Gorger outlet in the entire format. I mean, the downside, of course, are a lack of card advantage in the command zone. I would say that in Grixis, like even the best Grixis commanders aren't really about card advantage in the command zone. So I don't really rate that too poorly. I think it's legit.
I would compare Evelyn to like coincidentally enough, another commander that came out in that exact same set, Cormella. You are playing Grixis, which is good colors. We've discussed. You have a very solid 99 for the most part, with really good breach combos, really good nosing. You have Thorgal Consult. You know, you have a good Grixis deck. But in the way Cormella's combos are pretty fragile, but unique, World Gorger is fragile and lame. Anybody can tell you that World Gorger is the most fragile combo probably people play in CDH, because it exiles your entire board. Like, Chain of Smog gets rid of your hand, but, like, World Gorger, when you lose hard. But you are in Grixis, you can protect it, right? So that's why I stand by it. Because it just layers well with other Grixis stuff sometimes. But while Evelyn's really good, and I don't discredit her, I don't see how she's better than in other Grixis options.
I would also like to say that is why I rate this commander good, whereas something like Anya, I think is F tier. Anya has to run a lot of filler
Mhm.
to dig through a deck. Anya is Rakdos instead of Grixis. Like we cannot overstate enough how good these colors are. Like you're not in Rakdos where you have to run a bunch of those crappy madness cards to filter through your deck. Every card in your deck, for the most part, is very impactful when you're playing a Grixis pile like Evelyn. You can just run good cards, be a good, fast, efficient deck with blue to protect yourself and give you card draw in the form of Ristic and Mystic. There's a difference between being a commander like Evelyn trying to go for a World Gorger and being a commander like Anya going for a World Gorger. Because one of those has these neat little things called counter spells that can prevent you from getting blown to high hell.
One thing that I would like to point out with Evelyn in CDH, it is entirely possible to play Evelyn, play Displacer Kitten, and then be able to exile everyone's deck.
I did forget Kitten. That's real.
The variance it has is a bit much for my tastes.
Mhm.
I would much prefer something where I know what's going to happen and I know how to plan for it. But if you're going for something like Displacer Kate and Evelyn, that feels very much like a Yidris, where you don't know how to keep the turn going sometimes. And you're just trying to find a way to close out the game. But it is Grixis. You do have Adnaz. World Gorger Dragon isn't great, but it's still playable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say low B tier at highest.
I can agree with that, and I think, like everyone highlighted, you can turbo in these colors if you are just relying on the turbo strategy. There are better Grixis commanders that you can choose. I think this is a solid option because it offers a unique win path. Like we highlighted, the ability to exile the top card of each player's library and then letting you cast one of those cards per turn. Riley, you highlighted Displacer Kin. That's a great one that you can abuse with this, where you could try to do like a storm strategy that way, which is neat. You could also do like infinite ETBs with something like maybe Dockside or Cloudstone.
I miss Jaleva.
I think this is a better Jaleva in a lot of ways, but we'll talk about Jaleva too when she comes up. But I do think this is a better example of that commander strategy. I'm not sold on World Gorger. I do think you could make this deck work without World Gorger, honestly.
Agree.
Yeah.
But I want to put this wherever Cormella is.
The one counter I'll have to that is I think, at least in the case of Evelyn, she requires a bit more setup to really do well, and she's also a bit more dependent on the decks your opponents are playing. If you're against
Sometimes.
it depends on the strategy you're going for, but you'll feel a lot better if there's another Grixis deck at the table as opposed to like a low color or a stacks deck that you really can't take advantage of. For that purpose, I do think I would actually be okay putting her at the top of C right now, close to where Cormella is, but recognizing I think Cormella is at least a bit better.
Like, it depends on how you build it, naturally. You can build a worse deck, but I don't think we need to think about building a worse deck. We want to think about the best this deck can be.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I actually kind of like Evelyn more, but I mean,
They're super comparable.
I think it's, yeah, like you said, I feel like it's kind of marginal, but it just depends on what win condition you want to go with, which you think is better positioned. And, like most things, when you're going into a tournament or you're playing against a particular play group at like your LGS or something, a lot of this can be meta dependent. Like if you're like, oh, I'm not playing against a lot of removal, then maybe you're like, oh, by the way, let me just turn one this World Gorger.
If I could place every deck in F tier, I would, but I can't really justify that with this one. So I think, truth be told, great buddies with Abaddon, just bottom of C tier. But it sounds like y'all want to put her higher than that.
Abaddon sounds worse than Evelyn by a lot. Abaddon's not an outlet.
I do think putting Evelyn above is better. Then for right now, we can put her at the bottom of B tier. That seems to be. I'm
Ignore
thinking top
Riley
of
being
C.
evil.
I think it balances out. I think we could move her down to top of C later on, but for bottom of B right now, next to Cormella, is okay.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where she needs to be.
Makes sense.
Then moving on to our next contender for today, we have our second Bant deck of the evening in Falco Spara, Pactweaver. So Falco Spara is comparable to Elsha in the fact that she likes to take advantage of your top deck. It can combo with cards like Sensei's Divining Top, but it requires a lot more setup for that. You need something like Devoted Druid to get you infinite counters to really get that engine going.
That's the magic words, isn't it? Requires a lot more setup.
I know Falco Spara. I had a person I played with a lot who played this deck, and I've seen this deck play a lot. And you know what? Good for all you melee players. I'm really glad that you now have a melee character on a magic card. But he's not good. It's like, he does cool stuff. I think the Devoted Druid combo is really funny. Like, I can't say it's not funny. But it's Bant, which, again, colors just don't lend to the greatest game plan that isn't stacks. And Falco Spara doesn't feed that stacks game plan in any way, in any shape or form. And the card advantage he gives you is dependent on cards that you have on board, which requires you to play bad cards if you want to make the most of him. So it's like, it's lose-lose. Like, Elsha is red, has breach, has much easier to tutor combos, and like much more redundant combos sometimes.
I've already said my opinion on Bant stacks a couple times. That, just for the record, that hasn't changed. I still think Bant stacks are bad. But Falco Spara seems kind of like a cop-out. Like, it doesn't... like, oh, I'm not playing stacks, I'm playing counter. No, you're not. No, you're not. Don't tell yourself that.
So fucking accurate.
And that's interesting you mentioned stacks too, because these are colors that want to be more stacksy. You want to run things like Collect Roof in these colors. And having a combo that's reliant on an artifact like that can be a bit awkward at times.
I will at the very least give this to Falco. It's a better tech than Estrid. It's, your combos are better. You have ways to win the game. Low bar.
One of the less bad stacks. I would put this at top of F, maybe.
I would say one of the less bad Bant decks, but again, if you're playing Bant, did you know there's this really cool card that you can put in your command zone in anything playing blue and green that makes your deck better?
We'll discuss any Bant Thrasios deck later.
Yeah, I do think that there's not a perfect comparison for playing Thrasios. I don't know if Thrasios lends herself very well to a stack strategy, but at the same time, I don't think this commander does it either. So
Thrasios goes great in a stack strategy. Connie would have some words to say with you, Neko.
That's fine. I'll take the berating, but I wouldn't say top of F. I would actually put this, I think, below Ella Schnorn.
See, I was thinking below Emery.
They're all bad. I mean, it's comparing apples with worms in it and oranges with worms in it. You don't want either of them, and you should just put it in the garbage.
That's crazy, because I think I'm actually higher on it than you guys are then, because I would put this at the very least at the, top of F.
I said top of F. I just think the F decks are that bad.
I love how we're all disagreeing, but we're all saying it's still F tier.
Yeah, we're disagreeing on just how bad it is.
I mean, in my opinion, at least he's better than Norn.
Stop trying to defend Falco. Don't, just continue.
I don't like it more than Urif, that's for sure.
Maybe I would put it just right above Tim Narmix then, personally. But that's my personal opinion. I think it's better than Elish Norn because it's has 2 more colors. Anyway.
I like Elish Norn's ability, but I think based on what everyone's saying, a good compromise is between Timna Armix and a Elish Norn. Speaking of commanders we may not think are as good, moving on to our first Gruul deck, I think, of the tier list just from looking at what I see here. And probably not the best example of a Gruul deck. We have Faldorn, Dreadwolf Herald. Now, this is most commonly seen as a food chain deck.
So, I don't know what this card reads, and I think that's my entire argument.
As the resident Gruul player,
This is not representative.
as the resident Gruul player, I find it very unfortunate that you started with probably the worst Gruul deck that people play. Like,
People don't play this. Don't insinuate that this is played.
yeah, I'll say that much. People, I'll say this: people should not play it. This deck is turbo bad.
This is a casual deck. Put it at the bottom of F and let's stop talking about it, please. It's hurting my brain.
If you are going to play a Gruul food chain deck, guess what? Itali just released, and it can win the game with food chain. This is not a good deck. If you're going to play Gruul, there are a lot of good commander, or not a lot of good commander. If you're going to play Gruul, there are a few other options I would recommend beforehand that we will get to eventually, and I would love to talk about them. But this one, I have nothing to talk about because it's bad and don't play it.
See, I don't like food chain to begin with. So hearing, oh, the Dreadwolf Herald, I'm like, who? I've never heard of this card before. Oh, it plays food chain? Oh, it's Gruul? Oh, easy F tier.
Yeah, can't even tutor for food chain.
See, it's Gruul food chain. You have to gamble for the food chain, and it doesn't even win the turn you do it unless you have a haste enabler.
Or Impact Tremors, or Goblin Bombardment. Let's not be hasty now.
But for sure, like everyone highlighted, it is a deck that can do something, but it really struggles in the colors it's in, to do that thing, especially because, yeah, you just need to wait a turn, and having infinite wolves and just hoping you can untap and swing for damage, not a great feeling.
No.
You can run things like Kiki Jiki, and you do have the green tutors to try to tutor out pieces like that. But if that's the strategy you're going to go for anyway, play another Gruul commander. There are better ones that do that.
I can't wait to talk about the other ones that do that because I have a lot to say about them. I have nothing to say about this one.
I will say I do think it has not a strong place in CDH, but at least is worthy enough to be considered CDH in my opinion. But I do think, with that said, I am okay putting it at the bottom of F tier.
Why don't we move on to a commander that actually wins when you do the food chain combo?
Yeah, so we have another food chain commander coming up. I don't know if this one's necessarily the best food chain commander, but it at least 5 colors. And this one is the First Sliver. Riley, tell us about the First Sliver.
So the First Sliver says Cascade Sliver spells you control have Cascade. And so the idea with the deck is get food chain, make infinite creature mana, and then cast the First Sliver a bajillion times, cascade your entire deck, and then win with Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some options in the deck here in 5 colors. You can play stuff like Thassa's Oracle and Consult. You can play Dockside. You can play Adnaz if you wanted to. That's great. But you're still playing a food chain deck.
This is a 5-color food chain deck, and that's its claim to fame, and that's what it does. You don't really play this commander for other reasons. I think Cascade's inconsistent. It's like this deck is 5 colors. It does have breach lines, and it has consult, and the 5-color things. So there's a floor for how bad it gets. But Tiamat is better than First Sliver as a food chain deck. And Tiamat's awful. So I think that's kind of the end of the story there. Is I think we'll discuss food chain on some better food chain commanders, but this isn't one of them. 5 colors is bloated. Your commander doesn't really do anything, but you are 5-color good stuff. So let's slap it in D tier and call it a night, I think.
I'm not that high on First Sliver.
It's still, you're still playing a 5-color deck. At that point, I'd already put it above anything in D. However, I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I think this deck is just a worse food chain deck than Atraxa. I would just be playing Atraxa at this point. Like, maybe it's a bit early to be like, Atraxa is probably the best food chain deck, but, I'm willing to shoot my shot on that.
Your food chain just is kind of mid.
But again, like, food chain is not the best win condition in CDH. It's fine, it can do things, but at this point, you are playing a commander that, while it is 5 colors, the only thing it does is food chain, as opposed to a 5-color commander that also does a billion other things and is a broken card and does blah, 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 blah. You are playing a worse 5-color commander to run a worse combo, which I think is a very bad spot to be in. However, in the context of this tier list, you are playing a 5-color deck, and that alone, with a win condition in the command zone, puts it above D to me, looking at the commanders in D.
Here's where I'm gonna interject. The first sliver folds in half to Draneth. And so you can go all you want about 5-color, it can only be so bad, but it folds in half to the most common white card in the format. It's still F tier, but
It still does consult stuff with Janeth on the field. Like,
that doesn't make it better.
I'm playing the middle ground here. I'm gonna say D tier pretty confidently. The reason First Sliver would go that low, like, I agree with Bones more so. That it's like, 5-color, you have a certain quality there, but it's worse than other options you have. So, like, in 5 colors that do more, right? So unless you just like having a sliver there's not a reason to play it over other commanders, which makes it worse.
So when we look at the commanders that we've talked about for food chain, I think Atraxa stands out, like we mentioned, for one reason. And that's because most food chain commanders are only food chain commanders and nothing else. Which is why I think food chain gets a lot of flack in the CDH discourse, but I actually think it's a perfectly reasonable win con. The 5-color ones really exemplify the fact that sole food chain commanders aren't good. We've talked before about how relevant it is to get a commander on board as early as possible for things like Fierce Guardianship or Deflecting Swab. There are benefits to having your commander on the field. You're never going to cast First Sliver. It has 5 mana pips in its cost, and it's there just to be that outlet for food chain. So, yes, it's 5 colors, but I would say it's even worse than something like our good old Sultai Shark Boy food chain commander, just because it doesn't do what you want in 5 colors, unfortunately.
It makes it bloated.
I disagree with that. Like you said, the First Sliver is only a food chain outlet, but so is Ukima Kazar.
Here's the difference between Ukima Kazur and the First Sliver. We were discussing this earlier, and Connie, one of our friends, said, food chain decks that cannot comfortably consultation for food chain are not as good, which is really, like, that's why I think Ukima would be better than the First Sliver, is that First Sliver wants to do a lot of these things, but to do the food chain thing optimally, which is what it wants to do, it needs to be more streamlined and invested in food chain, because otherwise you're hurting yourself by playing worse cards in these good combos. So Ukima Kazur is very invested in food chaining, and that's all it does, but it's much more streamlined, right? It doesn't have these breach lines it has to worry about exiling stuff from. You can consult, exile your creature, hit food chain, win the game. First Sliver, like, yes, you can do that, but you also risk hitting your breach, hitting your Thoracle, and then at a point of interaction, then your other win conditions are gone.
Here's the thing about First Sliver. If you consult for food chain and you exile Jace, you're kind of screwed.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other thing that I want to just interject. Because you're usually winning with Jace, that means you can't really run anything above 5 CMC. So you can't run at least you can't run well Adnaz and Force of Will.
It does get clunky. Yeah, you're very right.
Yeah, it is very clunky. And so I would put it below Ukima Kazur just because even though it does have 5 colors, it is more fragile.
That's fair. That actually makes a lot of sense to me, I think.
With First Sliver, this might actually be the stand-in for most of those 5-color food chain decks. So I think the things we said about First Sliver can be said about Tiamat, they can be said about the 5-color Niv, all just dedicated food chain decks that don't benefit any real strategy that you're trying to do. So I'm perfectly fine putting it right under Ukima.
I would even say that we can just straight up put all 3 of them underneath Ukima in the order of like Tiamat, First Sliver.
Yeah, we aren't going to say unique things about those decks. I think that's probably fair to say.
When I put First Sliver in, I put Tiamat. First Sliver was just the placeholder. So when I say First Sliver, we're talking about Tiamat, we're talking about Niv, we're talking about all those ones.
Okay, yeah, then
So we're not even in the tier list. Okay, then
no.
yeah, that makes
Tiamat's the best one out of those 3, and Tiamat's still bad. So put it in the same spot below Ukima Kazur in what, D tier?
That makes sense.
I think it still highlights what the deck can do, being 5-color. It's not necessarily a horrible deck, but it is, I think, like you said, Mad, just bloated. But moving on to our next commander, we have a Rakdos commander that has actually gotten some good placements recently. I think it got a top 16. We have Florian.
So, like, you can do a lot of things with it. He's generic diggy card advantage, I guess. And that's not bad, right? Card selection and card draw, good things. But you're in a Rakdos, and your commander doesn't do anything else. And I don't know. I get it having a result, but that's just because the deck was probably built well. It could have been any Rakdos commander and probably done just as fine.
I mean, there's also like unknown factor. There's also like pilot skill. I'm gonna be real. I would literally never fade Florian over Rog Tevesh in the same colors.
I'm gonna invoke the cursed words. How is this ever any better than Timna? Like, this commander's so eh.
Florian would be really good as a Sire of Insanity deck.
You could literally just do that with Rog Tevesh and he would be better.
Or Obnixilis, new card, better Rakdos Dex commander. Like, just do something cooler, man. Florian's so boring. For boring points alone, put this bitch in F tier.
There is the thing that, I deal a lot of damage and it's sort of like a tutor because I can get really deep into my library and grab the exact card I need.
I do agree that the card isn't optimal in a lot of ways, and there are better ways to generate card advantage in a similar fashion. The issue, too, is being able to reliably swing in this current meta is difficult because there's just so many creatures. Yeah. You definitely need a wide variety of bodies, and that's not something Rakdos necessarily gives you.
Yeah, that's also super true. This dude gets blocked and you're screwed. Like, it's just so mid.
You know what's crazy though? I kind of like him a lot more than a lot of the commanders in D.
Like, I don't know, man. It's Rakdos. It doesn't do anything unique.
I think if I had to place him, I would put him in between where we currently have Dihada and Berkey.
I admit there's better options. I think Bones, the placement you mentioned between those two, I like.
I am going against the trend right now. I think under Captain Cedh. I'm making everybody just start froth at the mouth. I think that Florian gives a fair shake to Rakdos aggro. Like, it's not the worst you could be doing. It's not the best, but looking at the rest of D tier, I would play Florian over those.
That's kind of what I was mentioning. I like Florian more than a lot of the commanders in D. I like him less than Dihada, but I like him more than Berkey, which is why I said there. But I also like him more than Ukima Kazur, so...
I don't know why people would be particularly high on Florian for any reason, because he does card draw, which is just things that people do better. If you want to draw cards, play better card draw.
So looking at the commander as a whole, I do see that it's not necessarily the most exciting strategy. And I also recognize that it's hurt by a lot of different things. We've mentioned Drannith before. Drannith turns down a lot of what this card wants to do. But at the same time, I see where people are coming from. I do think it is probably a D commander. For our purposes, I think we can put it under Animar, but above Ukima and Kazur. The colors the deck offers is good. I think that it does have a pretty solid strategy overall.
I think red is just one of the stronger cards you can be running right now.
Same thing with black, but it's Rakdos, which is less good because you don't, like we've discussed, Rakdos, it doesn't have any utility like Mardu and Grixis have. It, like, theoretically should be good, right? It draws cards, it can tutor them, but that's black, right? And red does a lot of really cool things, but you think about a mono black deck, and you think about a mono red deck, and they go fast. But neither of them are particularly great at protecting themselves going fast. So when you put them together, and then you try to make it go slow, it's awful. And when you try to make it go fast, it can't protect itself.
I don't know. I think it sort of goes back to a lot of this, not as extreme, but the comparison between Evelyn and Anya, where, guess what? Your strategy doing the same thing gets a lot better with blue.
Rakdos is cool because it enables unique strategies through its commanders, and Florian doesn't do that. Who's next?
Next up, we have another partner commander. This one in blue farm colors. We have Bjorna and Wernog. And when we're looking at this commander, I think that we will look at this commander as if it has the Luris companion, which I think this combination usually does.
It's 4 colors. You're playing less good cards than Opus Thief for Luris, which is a 6 mana commander that you can't recur. So I don't know. You can do some cool stuff, but I think it's probably exactly in the same spot as Brea. And just like, yeah, it's 4 color and it's a good deck, but Opus Thief.
I actually think this deck is worse than Brea. I think it's just like giving up the sheer card draw of Tymna for Luris is just not worth it. And I don't think giving up the outlet that Brea is for these commanders is worth it either.
Yeah, Luris is a grind card, and it's not as good of a grind card as Tymna.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're giving up cards that you could be running for this really, really good grind engine that is literally just a worse grind engine than running Tymna in the command zone. So we talked about Brea being outclassed by Tymnacrom, and I think this is outclassed by Tymnacrom and then also outclassed by just Tymna ignoring Crom. I don't know. A lot of these decks just feel like worse blue farm to me in these colors.
What you lose with Tymnacrom by going Bjorna Wernog, you go like all in on breach lines.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that trade-off is worth it.
No, you can still breach perfectly fine with other commanders. I think Luris can offer some fun strategy. It does give you some recursion that you can get, especially if you need to recur something like your Underworld Breach and need to try again. But there's also things like Savine's Reclamation that do a very similar thing.
I've been breached enough by Blue Farm to say that they can just do it perfectly fine.
Yeah, I have to say, like, that's the thing, right? Is, like, to get any value out of Luris, you're gonna pay 3 mana to get it in your hand. You're gonna pay 3 mana to play Luris. And then you get to play one thing out of your graveyard. And, like, you should be winning already. You're 4 colors. You should have won back when you were paying 3 mana to cast Luris, right? You should have already set up and won at this rate, right? You could have just paid 3 mana for Tymna, and that's the end of your setup.
You do clues, but I believe you also give your opponents clues, which, yes, you get more clues for doing
the
that.
clues aren't The clues aren't card advantage. Don't call them card advantage because you have to pay so much mana for them.
The point I was making was that you also give your opponents the ability to draw cards if they want to. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily something you would like to do. And just from experience, I can say that this deck will feed an opponent's dockside like no other.
Oh god, yeah.
Giving your opponents the choice on like, oh, you know, do I make one clue or do you also make a clue? And do I make 2 clues? The only reason that they're going to take a clue is because they have a dockside in hand and they want you to have more artifacts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the commanders, between the engine that they get and the outlet that they provide, is unique enough to be worth talking about. I think Luris is fine, but people don't even run Luris in like the 99, so I don't know if building a deck, at least in these colors, just around that is where you want to be.
Mm-mm.
I would think this deck is probably bottom of C tier for me.
Oh, you're much higher on it than I am.
Yeah, I mean, where's Brea? Top of C tier?
Mhm.
Yeah, bottom of C. That sounds right. Maybe even D. Like, the more I think about this in theory, you're just sacrificing so much for so little.
Yeah, I would have put it in between Bergie and Amanatu.
Yeah, I don't know. But okay, you have to say 4-color Opus like 4-color good, or I keep saying Opus Thief, it's Blue Farm, but it's okay. So like that's what pushes it up at all. Like you have the downsides, yes, of the commanders and just not being great, but at least you are Sans Green Turbo, which is, as we've discussed, a really good strategy. So if you just squint really hard and pretend you don't have your commanders and you just go fast and you do that thing, your deck's awesome. But you know what deck can do that and then also not have to squint at your command zone?
Yeah, and you can cast your commanders. Unfortunately, once you do cast them, they don't do much for you outside of what we've talked about.
I don't know. I think it makes sense to go around there in near low C, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it in comparison to the things at the bottom of C, but I feel like I like them more than that. So
Right, then how about we say top of D for this one?
Sure.
Okay.
Not just because it's like such a worse option.
Yeah, it's not the greatest option. It does still do stuff, but yeah, I'm fine with that. Even the commanders in D do stuff, so. But it just goes to highlight too, the Friends Forever commanders, a lot of hype around them, didn't really provide much. You still see them from time to time, but not as powerful as people were initially hoping.
Partner when limited to bad partners is, balanced partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we're whining about balanced partner. If partner didn't exist, I'm sure we'd be like, these Friends Forever commanders are bangers. But, they do. And so we don't.
And speaking to not quite partner, but partner, we have Gale Waterdeep Prodigy, specifically paired with Scion of Hollister.
This is the Dimir one. I've played this deck. Yeah, it's Dimir Naz. You have some unique Spellseeker lines you can do, that are just like faux Anala lines, with Gale. There's some silly stuff you can do, and Gale's a really cool storm engine. He's just kind of fragile. He costs 3 mana. But you're in Dimir. You do the thing. You do it fast. I don't think there's too much you can complain about with Gale. Like, it's not as good as some of the Dimir commanders. It's not as bad as some of the Dimir commanders. I definitely think he's super middle of the pack. But again, Dimir, good color combination. So
Dimir is definitely good. I do like the recursion that this commander offers. It is a bit restricted, and you do really need to plan around it. But being able to recur something like a Tainted Pact and try to do something off that can be really fun.
It does cool. No, playing this deck is a blast. I can tell you that. But in terms of actually performing, like graveyard, a little fragile, interactable. But he's cool. He doesn't provide card advantage in the typical sense, but it's the reason Dimir is so good. I'm sure we all know is because Thoracle Consult and the good parts, like the not breach parts of Grixis, the not breach and dockside parts of Grixis, So Dimir tutors for Thorgal Consult well. It has some other cool stormy lines it can do. It's got protection. It's got card draw. Blah blah blah. Good colors. The best colors in CDH objectively, right? Like when viewed by themselves, Dimir is just like better than any other color combination. Like other 2-color combination, let's say.
You certainly have access to the best win con in Commander right now in those colors, so that can't be dismissed.
I would say any Dimir deck, if it's placed lower than C, we're probably doing it wrong. Unless it's like objectively a terrible commander. I'm gonna say this is probably C, high C.
It was pointed out how because Gale targets the card in the graveyard, you have more opportunity for on-stack interaction. However, it also just folds to graveyard hate.
Well, yeah, but that's a lot of commanders. It also can't interact with them as easily. You are correct, yeah. But a lot of Dimir decks fold to graveyard hate like that. They use Mnemonic Betrayal. They use Yawgmoth's Will. Like, they're already doing those things. Gale is just another way to do those things, right?
Gale loses significantly more hard to graveyard hate than other decks of this caliber. I actually think that Gale Scion is one of the less good Dimir decks, mostly because they're like, I guess you can call Scion card advantage, but good god.
You aren't really casting Scion ever. Scion's for colors.
I mean, you can cast Scion, but like,
But why would you?
5 mana that needs your commander to be in play, and all it does is let you look at an extra card whenever you do your, what is it, first draw a turn or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You lose Murder to Grave Hate. Your commander doesn't really do much on his own. Here's the thing, though. Dimir is probably the best 2-color pair in CDH. I think Dimir is the best you can be in 2 colors. You could do much worse than Gale's Scion.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you're going to be playing a Dimir deck, I would be playing a Dimir deck with more advantage in the command zone that also loses to less. I'm looking at something like Malk Tevesh. I'm looking at something like Vohar. I think there's a lot of oh god, even Rona, the new Rona that was released, I think is actually
Rico.
yeah. And you said Jericho, Riley?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's so much better you can do in these colors. However, you are in these colors. Like we talked about Faldorn, and when you're looking at a commander like Faldorn, not only are you a commander that does nothing, but you are in one of the weaker color combinations in the format. Sorry, my girlfriends, I love you, but ouch. As opposed to something like Dimir Scion, where your commander does have things it can do. It can flashback some cool stuff. It does some really cool stuff with Entomb.
Yeah, again, those faux Spellseeker lines are really interesting.
It's still better than a lot of stuff that is in the lower tiers. I think anything you're doing in this deck is, better than something you're doing in, I don't know, something lower. I mean, like, I'm looking at a deck like Ukima Kazura, which has Dimir in it, but Gale Scion still has some very interesting advantage in the command zone. And that mixed with being in very strong colors, I think actually means that this commander, while not being insanely compelling, is definitely not dead in the water. I don't think it's D. I think it might be low C.
Yeah, low C probably. That makes more sense than high C probably, because we have Abaddon in low C, right?
Yeah, I think this commander is worse than Abaddon.
I mean, red is a little like this commander definitely does more powerful things than Abaddon, I think. But red is, that slight advantage. I'd say they are, probably around the same.
Say bottom of C tier is a good place for this one right now. It does fold to a lot of hate, a lot of stacks pieces, not only graveyard hate, but also rule of law effects and such. Our next 2 commanders are, I think, going to be really juicy topics to discuss. The first one being the Gitrog Monster.
Oh, finally, a commander worse than Faldorn. No, I'm kidding.
So we do need to set a floor here, is that the Gitrog community is not representative of Gitrog commanders. The Gitrog is a commander. And so Gitrog is a commander. everybody knows you do Dagmar salvage. And Light for the Loam, and you go crazy, and you do the thingy, and there's like 72 pages of how to avoid every stacks piece in the game, and how to find Dagmar salvage behind your ear and behind your opponent's ear, and like, yeah, it does a lot of stuff, man, but it's Golgari, and it's so fragile, and everybody, and I mean every single person that would ever sit down at a competitive Elder Dragon highlighter table is gonna know what you're doing with the Gitrog Monster.
No, you say that. A lot of people actually don't know the lines very well.
They don't know them by heart, but they know what the deck's doing.
It's hard, actually. You see a lot of people don't know where to interact or how to stop the commander because the lines are so intricate like that.
But once you know, like, once you lose to Gitrog Monster one time and somebody tells you where the point of interactions are, you aren't going to forget them. Nobody's going to forget them. And you see him once, and he might beat you, right? Because he goes fast. But once you've seen Gitrog Monster do his thing, he's done the thing. And you're going to know how to interact with it. And so Gitrog Monster gets to the point where it's like, okay, do they have the counterspell? Do they have the Graveyard 8? It's like we think Glass Cannon. This is one of the most Glass Cannon decks, right?
I actually disagree on that. The
Yeah.
deck's specifically designed to be able to win under those effects that try to stop them. Even on the stack, it can do that, which is really crazy.
It can, and like a Gitrog player that knows everything about this deck is definitely much more threatening, and I'm gonna that's a real thing to consider. But Gitrog Monster as a commander, he's powerful. Yeah, but he doesn't he's not gonna stick on the board, he's gonna get destroyed. You're not gonna have your graveyard full, somebody's gonna exile it. We play a lot of games personally against Karik, right? It's like decks like that are very threatening, but once you know how to interact with them, when to interact with them, and how to expect it, you can very easily mulligan for a hand that interacts with it. If there are two people that interact with it, most of the time it's just not gonna have the gas to keep going, right? And eventually Gitrog Monster is gonna cost 7, 9 mana, and you're going to have sacrificed your lands to Arena Filth or something, and you're going to sit there and you're not going to get to play the game for the rest of it, right? And again, nobody can deny it's powerful, but it loses and it sits there when it does. And I think that puts it in, it's a poster child of Glass Cannon.
So, my introduction to CDH, the first deck I ever built that was like an actual CDH deck was a Gitrog deck. I have opinions about this deck. Have you ever heard the story of the Four Horsemen of Magic the Gathering? So the Four Horsemen is a combo deck that you cannot play in tournaments because the combo is non-deterministic and it will take way too long to actually execute the combo. You'll be disqualified for slow play.
Yes.
Gitrog is the closest you can get to the Four Horsemen and still be competitive.
It's like, think about Overwatch Genji, right? Those guys will be slamming their keyboards, and they'll be throwing shurikens, and they'll be jumping around. But if you smack them with a hammer, they fall to the ground and they die. I don't know.
It's built to function underneath a lot of stacks effects. It's also built to function sitting underneath its own commander's effect for a few turns.
I've watched no deck other than Crick sit there after it loses and suck on its thumb more.
It feels to me, it has this nostalgia around it. As when I was learning about CDH, it was like one of those decks that was like, Gitrog is a CDH deck, and it's going. I don't know. I don't think it's amazing. I just like the Silly Frog. I think he's cool. I think the card is awesome, and I think it's hilarious hitting an Eldrazi off of an ad nauseum. But I don't have any real thoughts about this deck.
Yeah, well, that's one of the thoughts about the deck. Is Golgari Naz is considered the better form of the deck now, right? Is Nazfrog?
I think so.
Like, I don't know the new iterations of the deck. Truth be told, nowadays I don't know a lot about this deck, and it will forever remain a boogeyman of CDH. I think.
It has a very high ceiling. Honestly, I would put it above Arkham and C right now.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
See, I agree with you on C. I was gonna say below Abaddon though.
Can we just make it Gitrog tier?
So honestly, middle of C. So moving on to our last commander of the evening, we have Godo, a mono red beast, another pillar of old CDH.
So I've actually played a good amount of Godo. I was literally just today, my friend was like, hey, I was looking to get into CDH, you guys are always playing it. I was very curious about it. And I'm looking at decks and I'm like, maybe we could try Godo.
Godo is that. Yeah, it's a good intro deck, that's for certain.
Yeah, I played a lot of it. I think it's awesome. And I think it's one of those decks that is it's very linear. I know exactly what this deck is going to do to me. But I think that leads to people disrespecting it. And at that point, I've seen it pop off and win a lot. I think this deck still has sauce to it. I think you can still very much take Godo to something and win because it is a very solid strategy. It has your ways to get back your thing. The biggest issue with this deck is that you are so linear. You do your one thing and you want to do it. And like you can say, oh, you can add whatever other win con, but it's not really good to do. The deck really wants to be this linear play Godo, equip Helm kind of thing, and that's your thing. And despite being linear, I think it does have a lot of power to it. And I think that it is a very good option, first of all, to get used to CDH. I think Godo is very good for just showing the format, I guess. And I just think it's a really nice deck.
The list doesn't change a lot. It's a deck with, it has ways to just cast Godo fast, and it has stacks that it can play under, right? Like some stacks it can break parity on sometimes, right? Just to help it, interact in the slightest bit other than protecting itself. You know what you are doing, and your game actions are pretty simple. And obviously, there's a little more nuance to it. I don't want to disrespect the Godo players, and I don't want to talk shit on Godo. We know it's red, and we know it's fragile sometimes. Everybody knows why Godo isn't awesome. Nobody can say Godo is bad ever.
One of the great things about Godo and introducing CDH to new players is that Godo teaches you when it is safe to combo.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I think the deck, in a lot of ways, is deceptively simple like that. The idea, yes, you just need to get to 11 mana and you win the game. But like you all mentioned, there is a lot of nuance to that. What I find interesting is that this is a deck that, by all accounts, should have gone by the wayside. Power crept and changing of meta should have annihilated this deck. But it hasn't, and that's because there's a dedicated group of people who are making this deck work. People have said the deck doesn't change much. I think it has because it needs to change. It's constantly adapting to run more removal and more like copy effects to ensure that you can get your Godos out.
Like the deck, yeah, it'll change out cards, but new cards aren't coming out to like break Godo. And if they do, like, awesome. I think we can all say it's comfortably like C tier, right? He's the Goomba on 1-1. He's Mario in Smash Brothers. He's fucking Ryu in Street Fighter. He's like, he's there. He's the one you learn the tutorial on. He's Soldier 76 in Overwatch. I mean, like,
See, I think it's actually top of D tier. It is fairly simple. Everybody knows what you're doing. Everyone knows the points of interaction that will stop you. Everyone knows that, hey, if you have a 3/2 first striker, you're never going to die. But it is a good deck. It's just mono red.
Mhm.
And there are some crazy hands it can have, like it could go Mox Crypt and Jessica's Will.
Turn one treasonous ogre, baby.
Like, it could turn on Troger and win the game, but that's not likely, and you're not able to really get the pieces you need to do that effectively, either with tutors or with card draw. And so, for as good as the deck is, it's not that great, in my opinion.
It's just a point of the deck or point of the game where you're just sitting there trying to ramp out best you can and just playing a ramp piece and passing while everyone else is playing the game in a way.
I don't know. There's an inevitability to Godo.
I like Godo more than Gitrog, and y'all can fight me on that one.
You know what? I kind of agree.
I'm fine putting him above Arkham even.
Oh yeah, no, Arkham is comparable in that inevitability sense. And they have the same weaknesses of being monocolored.
Godo also just folds to a collector roof.
It does, but a lot of decks fold to Collector Oof, unfortunately.
Well, it doesn't necessarily fold to Collector Oof. You could have Hammer of Nazan, right? That doesn't fold to Collector Oof. Godo loses most to a Swords to Plowshares.
It loses most to Opposition Agent. To be honest.
Yeah, Oppo Agent too. But you can bolt Oppo. What does it say against Swords to Plowshares, right? Deflecting Swat? Like, that's it?
But thank you everyone for joining us. It's great having you here. We hope you enjoyed our bantering, our ramblings on CEDH. If you liked the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts down in the comment. We hope to see you next time.
Put a comment about how much you love Godo.